Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today, we're going to have another very interesting show. I have invited back Riane Eisler, who was a guest on the show many years ago, talking about her work, such important work in the world of sociology, understanding community, understanding what has made her world renowned, actually, which is the relationship of us to she calls the Dominator Model versus the partnership model. And it's something that I feel we all know in our guts, in our, our organic nature, that partnership is really the way of the future, the way of the present, even. And yet we seem like we insist on other, dare I say, more barbaric measures and models. So Riane has continued on literally for decades in championing the partnership model, and we'll be speaking about that to some extent today. First, just a little bit on Riane's formidable background. She is a JD and PhD and is the recipient of many honors, such as the Distinguished Peace Leadership Award that had also been given to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. She's internationally known, as I was saying, for her groundbreaking contributions as a systems scientist, futurist, attorney, and cultural historian. She is author of many books, perhaps most famously, The Chalice and the Blade, now in its 57th U.S. printing and in 27 foreign editions. The Real Wealth of Nations, I love that name, hailed by the Nobel Peace Laureate Desmond Tutu as, quote, a template for the better world we have been so urgently seeking. Her most recent book, Nurturing Our Humanity, published by Oxford University Press, is co-authored with Douglas Fry. So that gives you a little sense of Riane's outstanding background and present. So it's really a pleasure to have you on today, Riane, again.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you again.
Good. So you're working on a project right now, which, as you noted earlier in our conversation, is right up the alley of A Better World. Something I've written about extensively, talked about extensively on this show, on different podcasts, and that is the idea of making peace at home. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Yes, I certainly can. On October 29th, we are going to have the first virtual summit with some really outstanding speakers, including, by the way, Eric Barker, who is the president of Equimundo, working on caring men, because that's really, the partnership model is about real partnership, and that includes the male form as well as the female form and everybody in between. But the summit addresses root causes rather than only symptoms. We have to have tactics, we have to put out the fires, but we really must begin to address root causes, and we must do this together, not by guilting or shaming, but by showing that there is a better alternative.
Well, what would you refer to then as, what do you see as root causes?
Well, there are four cornerstones that are both I've introduced the partnership domination scale, right? And it is a scale. Mm-hmm. Because no society orients completely to one or the other. And we are in the midst of a regression to domination. And if you think of the four cornerstones of both partnership and domination systems, mm-hmm. you can keep in mind what's happening right now. The first cornerstone is childhood and family. You can't really understand the partnership domination scale and the fact that there is a partnership alternative and has been for millennia.
Sure.
In fact, we have evidence of that. The story we've been told of war being built into human nature is false. War started 10,000 years ago, and in some places is still does not exist. But family and childhood neuroscience shows are basic not only to how our brains are formed, but to how we feel, how we think, how we act, including how we vote. And hence, the peace begins at home. Summit. We have to change the vocabulary, the language. That's one of the cornerstones, story and language. We talk about domestic violence, and it's immediately marginalized. It's family violence. It's violence in the family.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to address this. Now, the second cornerstone is gender. And again, we are taught to marginalize, domestic violence, violence against women, largely not important. Actually, gender, how we structure the roles and relations of the two basic forms of humanity, male and female, and everybody in between, whether it's flexible or you have these rigid gender stereotypes, whether it's ranking or linking, that is a fundamental family, social, and economic organizing principle. I wrote a book, as you know, called The Real Wealth of Nations.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
yes,
a fantastic title.
So these are the four cornerstones. Economics is also a cornerstone. So it's
Sure.
family, childhood, gender, economics, and story, language. And the summit addresses all four.
I love that. We were talking earlier, Riane, about neuroscience and its role in understanding really human behavior in general, and of course, in particular, in this conversation, the dominator model versus the partnership model. And what is it? So this is a subject that I have been looking at, scrutinizing for literally decades, and I've written extensively about it, of understanding genetic, hormonal, epigenetic stories about the true biology of human beings and our brain structures and how these relate to different types of behavioral patterns. And I find that there are ways of understanding our violent nature by understanding what part of the brain we have mainly developed, and our tendency, by the way, toward a dominator model instead of a partnership model. It also has to do, you could say that's one channel. Another one of several is you talked about a caring man. And I love that because men are stereotyped, as are women. And I know you so well know that you discuss it at length. In this case, since I rely on the work of Carl Jung to some extent in this regard, of the anima and the animas, the male aspect and the female aspect of a human being, of all of us, regardless of, irrespective of our outer gender coding, if you will, we all have both. We have the yin and the yang, to use the Chinese cosmological perspective. To that extent that a man is able to incorporate and embrace and integrate his feminine qualities in nature, which, by the way, includes caring and nurturing, this mammalian nature that we really have. To that extent, we can start to work toward, I think, a partnership model. And same for a woman, that we work in harmony together. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
Well, I have so many thoughts, and I can't wait until you read Nurturing Our Humanity.
Okay.
Because
I'd like to read it right now, but I have the pleasure of speaking with you.
Well, I can only give you a little tiny
Please do.
kernel, which is that the argument between nature and nurture is a distraction. It is not nature or nurture, but
Right.
nature and.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
therefore,
Good point.
it really, and number two, the story about what is our biological, quote, human nature, whether it's selfish genes or whether it's original sin, they fight each other, but it's the same story, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Bad, we have to be rigidly controlled from the top, as in God-fearing. Those are stories that are simply not true. Empathy developed in the course of evolution, and it is a integral to human nature. But
Absolutely.
the problem is that in domination system, you only at best have empathy for the in-group, but not the out-group. And this is where gender comes in, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you grow up in a family, a domination-oriented family, that, by the way, Putin, he's a barbarian, really. He believes in violence. Well, he in 2018 lowered the penalty for family violence. Now, why? Because the people pushing us back get the connection, and Putin certainly gets it, between a rigidly male-dominated, authoritarian, punitive, often violent, physically violent family, and that kind of a state or tribe.
Yes.
We have to learn to connect the dots. And my research does just that. It is whole systems
Yes.
research. And
Yes.
we ignore family, we ignore gender at our peril today. Because unless we address these four cornerstones, we will not have the foundations. And why do you think, by the way, that these regressions to domination pay so much attention to gender and to childhood? Control your children, control your wife, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is not coincidental. It's part of a system, and it's part of a domination rather than partnership system. We have to
Really
understand.
true. Really true. Very well put. Very well put. Can I tell you a little story about something I came up with when I was not quite a wee lad, but a long time ago, when I was demonstrating for peace back in the days of Vietnam, quite honestly. And it occurred to me, really, as a teenager, that the way to have peace is for everyone to go home to their family, because everyone has a family of one fashion or another. Even if someone is homeless, they have a family of other homeless people, let's just say. There's some kind of community shelter somewhere that people have a roof over their head and are interfacing with others. So I said to myself and to others, if everybody just were to go home to whatever they consider home and make peace with those people they are around, humbly and with humility apologize for what they've done wrong, because we've all transgressed and violated other people's dignity, etc., in one way or another, and own up to it, apologize, and at the end of it, almost a kumbaya moment, hold hands and laugh together and drink something, if even if it's water, but have merriment. And in that moment, if you look out at the world, the planet from above, a meta position, so to speak, you would see that the world is actually at peace. It wasn't because governments agreed to sign a contract for peace. It wasn't because nations decided to lay down arms. It's because people at home on their own decided to vote for peace and acted on it. So anyway, it's just kind of a funny way of thinking, but I have a feeling it speaks to what you're speaking of now when you talk about home for peace.
Well, if you, we know that what children observe or experience, especially in their first 5 years of life, shapes our nothing less than how our brains are structured, because we're not born with fully formed brains. Most people don't
Correct.
know this. We should, but we have to connect the dots. Our universities are very siloed at the moment. Gender studies, for example, are only 60 years old. And Western science goes, well, it goes back to a, as the historian of science, David Noble wrote, to a world without women and also without children, a celibate, misogynist, all-male world, right? Except women did the cleaning and the cooking. But you know, there are many trends towards partnership, and I really always want to focus on that, because our job is to show there is a better alternative. It's not to disrupt or to disentangle or to, you know, unravel everything. That's being done already. Okay.
Yes.
Because, well, for one thing, our old institutions, our old system of values, which codes caring as feminine, and hence it's devalued, right? They're not adaptive in our era of biological and nuclear weaponry, our conquest of nature. I mean, what is that? That's part of the domination system, isn't it?
Exactly. Straight from the Bible.
Straight from the Bible, but straight from traditions of domination. But look, I want to talk about nations that have moved more towards partnership.
Yes. Oh, that would be awesome.
Well, the Nordic nations have.
Yes.
Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark.
Finland.
And they're not socialists. They have a very healthy market economy. This whole argument between capitalism and socialism is a red herring. It's a distraction. We need to look, both Smith and Marx challenged some traditions of domination, but they were products of their time, more rigid domination times.
Yeah.
And so they saw the work of caring for people starting at birth and caring for our Mother Earth as just reproductive rather than productive. Caring for people was to be done by a woman for free in a male-controlled household, and is therefore not part of our GDP or GNP, and neither are trees. Because I remember the present, you have to read The Real Wealth of Nations, really,
Sure.
because our present economic systems exclude the three life-sustaining sectors: the household, the volunteer community, and the natural economy.
Yes.
And that
those are externalized economically.
It's externalized. So, but these nations, which are way ahead of us, by the way, us being the United States, even before the current regression, in caring for our natural life-sustaining system, but they have more of a partnership configuration. They are more caring societies. And by the way, the story of selfish genes is incorrect. Why? These nations invest much more, and they're, by the way, they have 40% or 50% of their legislature is female. There is less authoritarianism and more equity in both the family and the economics and in the state. It is a partnership configuration.
Yes.
But they give more of their national product in foreign aid to nations, to people with whom they are not genetically related. People on the other side of the globe. So there are a lot of stories. We have to re-examine our stories because so many of them, like selfish genes or original sin, they're just wrong.
Norway is known particularly for what you're saying of providing aid across the planet And another way of examining this whole story you're telling, Riane, about the Nordic nations is to examine the way they treat their prisoners, people who have broken the law. And Michael Moore, in one of his films, did a wonderful expose about that, as has 60 Minutes, just to name a few. But they treat their prisoners in Norway with dignity. They have their own little abode. They have a key to that abode. They have their own ability to make food and prepare and all, and go out and visit with the other prisoners. They're treated with dignity and respect. They're given a chance. They're given an opportunity to rehabilitate, experience remorse, experience, as you keep saying, empathy, which is a deeply human characteristic. I use the word mammalian because, quite honestly, I think of us as a species. And that, I think, is the healthiest way, because then helping people abroad, helping people in other parts of the world that are less fortunate, say, materially, is not a big stretch. It's a very natural, organic tendency. Anyway, I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Absolutely. And it is very important to remember that these nations have the first, not only the first peace academies, but the first laws saying that physical discipline against children in families is against the law.
Oh God, I didn't know that. Isn't that
Well,
interesting?
but the two are completely related, you see.
Totally. Oh yeah.
And they're related to what you just shared
Sure.
about people who have been criminals.
By the way, the recidivism rate is at an all-time low in those countries, which is proof positive that it works. Here, they are treated like animals. If we look at what's going on today, it's kind of unspeakable to look at what's going on. But that, I know, it's just corroborating your and my points here about how important it is to treat people, no matter what their transgression, with human dignity and respect. And I believe, and you believe, that that will take us to the next evolutionary point a lot quicker and more effectively. Your comments?
Well, the comments are that we don't have much time. And the punitive family and the punitive attitude towards in prisons here in the United States and in most nations.
Yes.
I mean, you know, and this whole in-group versus out-group thinking and acting, it is simply not evolved and it is not adaptive. In a world that's interconnected, not only by technologies of communication and transportation, but by weaponry that can span the globe in a matter of seconds, really. This is not adaptive. We have got to really, and that takes me back to the four cornerstones, to family, childhood, and neuroscience, of course, verifies this again and again, to gender, to economics, because we penalize those who do the caring work. We still do. It is not rewarded. You know, I have really been an advocate of paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers, as they have in these Nordic nations.
Oh,
it's part of the trend. They have caring policies. And that's precisely why they have such a successful market economy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Take note, folks. There is a direct relationship. It's not a casual correlation. It's causal between the health and well-being of the family in a partnership atmosphere to the results in economic results.
And really, you can't understand complex living systems just in simple causes and effects. it's very useful, that model of research, but you have to look at interconnections and mutually supporting. That, that two physicists got the Nobel Prize in Physics just recently for their work on entanglement,
Yes.
interconnection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, physics on the subatomic level
Correct.
is interconnected.
That's
We
right.
are interconnected, and this in-group versus out-group, I mean, whether it's racism or anti-Semitism or anti-this ethnicity or that, or anti-gays, I mean, everything, it is not functional. It won't work. There have been people who have been gay, who have been transgender since the beginning, for goodness sakes. And men have to give no less than their lives because some guy on top, like a Putin, wants more real estate in a domination system. I mean, it is not good for anyone. So our job today is to show that there is a better partnership alternative and that it really starts with family, with gender, with the connection. And the people pushing us back get that connection. I mean, we have to really just observe what's happening in front of our very eyes.
Very true. Very true. They know it, and they're violating what is our true nature, I believe.
Yes.
And that is partnership. I really do. I think it's the true organic expression of human relationship, male, female, etc. So, I mean, we're so on the same page. Ideas that I really bring forward in my speaking, my teaching, my everything have a lot to do with Riane, with the idea of emotional intelligence, EQ, and has a lot to do with emotional maturity. Having gone down the spiritual path of Zen and Taoist and other Buddhist traditions for a long time, and thinking that enlightenment was the main subject for human being. And while I feel it has a very important place regarding human potential, I personally have come to believe that emotional maturity, leading then eventually to wisdom, is the most important thing. Embodying human virtues is more important than perhaps any other kind of personal and human development that exists, because those qualities bring us forward to compassion, patience, which nobody wants to exercise, understanding. We were talking about empathy before. These qualities are the things that bind us together and form a family and form love. I wrote a paper on, is oxytocin the answer to world peace? And I actually believe it is. So we're playing around with very biological matters that can really lead us to a higher level. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that you are right and that we have to deal with trauma because domination systems
very good point.
Trauma factories.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're paying more attention to trauma, along with the women's movement, the anti-racism movement, the environmental movement, they're all challenging the same thing, traditions of domination, for goodness sakes. And
you're really right.
They really, we have to work with one another rather than against one another. And of course, we have to change the reward system economically. And that's why one of the cornerstones is a caring versus an uncaring economics.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely essential.
Talk about cornerstones. That's a cornerstone.
That is a cornerstone, of course. And it's not coincidental that our economic system has a hidden system of gendered values.
Yes.
With anything stereotypical.
And gender bias.
And gender bias, yes, completely. With anything that is stereotypically in domination systems considered feminine rather than masculine is devalued. So caring, nonviolence, they're devalued when they're very valuable. Whole systems thinking is what we need, connecting the dots.
Correct. Absolutely. Beautifully put. I've been saying for a long time that men have failed in leadership, politically and economically. Making more money is not the definition of success, but I personally like the idea that comes to us through the Green Party, which A Better World has very much embraced, which is the idea of people and planet before profit. And I used to talk about this with another futurist, a dear friend, green economist, Hazel Henderson.
Oh,
and
Hazel
this was right. I know you know. And
she was a good friend of mine too.
Yes, I am aware. And we were always speaking about that essential principle in a successful economy, that we talked about externalities. And she's the one who really brought that to my focused attention of how important it is to bring them back into the fold, if you will, as being real economic drivers, which you were indicating yourself before. And, in other words, women's work, childcare, these things that are thought of as non-economic aspects of life. I mean, how absurd is that? I mean, didn't the women's movement many years ago, Riane, do the calculations of the number of hours a woman spends taking care of the home and taking care of the children and putting an hourly rate on that? They were making more money than most of their husbands.
Well, we have to reward in a monetized world. We can't get rid of money. It's an economic invention. In a monetized world, that work must be rewarded. And that has been one of the themes, and of course, the real wealth of nations. And it is not that we don't need markets. We don't happen to have a free one. And it's not that we don't need government policies, but they have to be enlightened policies, like paid parental leave, like support for high quality childcare. The Nordic nations, education, teaching, childcare, they are highly valued and therefore highly paid.
Yep.
Now, we've got it backward, don't we?
Yeah. Well, what I started to say before is when I said that male leadership has failed on virtually every level, I would like to see women, like you were referring to before, of the president, for instance, of Finland and other women leaders. I'm talking about presidents and prime ministers, and let the men go out and play golf. I don't know. Something. Yeah, I'm being a little playful right now, but you know what I mean. But wait a minute. One last thing here. It's not women who are acting like men. It's women who are being women. That's what we need. We don't want them giving their souls up to live in a man's world. We want it to become really a more feminized world in the true sense of embodying the feminine qualities that you and I both extol. Yeah, please.
Well, I would say that in the world of the future, we will get rid of this whole polarity between masculine and feminine. Because they're artificial constructs, just like these gender stereotypes.
Yes, it's a good point. Yeah.
We don't want to blame men. It is the system that allows the men who are, frankly, capable of suppressing their empathy for others to the top. And that is not real masculinity.
No.
And, again, getting back to the summit on peace begins.
Yes, please.
Children need to see fathers model caring. One of our speakers is Gary Barker, the president and founder of Equimundo, who talks about caring men. And I think it's very, very important that we think this way, that we free ourselves and that we re-examine the old stories, the old fairy tales.
Yes.
God, they're awful. I mean,
Yes.
and kings and queens.
Grimm's fairy tale?
So they're very grim.
God. They're grim.
Well, listen, we could talk forever, couldn't we?
We could. And I've lost touch with time. I've lost touch with Father Time and instead embraced the beautiful maternal cycle of Mother Earth with your presence. So thank you for being a guest today. And do you want to make any last comments or words about the upcoming summit for our audience?
I invite all of you, first of all, to go to the CPS website, which is centerforpartnership.org. I invite you to watch for news of the summit, which will be in its own website soon. Peace begins at home, and to attend it, to support it. And I also want to invite you to take the course that I give online, which is called Changing Our Story, Changing Our Lives. And it's very affordable, and we do give scholarships, and we really have to connect the dots. And that's what that course, which consists of 4 half-hour webinar type talks, lots of visuals in it. And you can, of course, read my books, and read my articles.
That's
I
beautiful.
did an interview in the Scientific American connecting dominator families with strongman rule, for example. So you can find all of these resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with me today on A Better World. It's always a pleasure to have you and to hear your wisdom coming forth, because you've made a real impact on the planet for a long time, Riane, and I see you continue to do so. And I'm honored to have you as a guest today again to talk about things that are so dear to both of our hearts.
Well, thank you, and keep up the important work. And do attend our wonderful summit. Peace begins at home.
Thanks again. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and take it all to heart. Riane is a renowned teacher and philosopher, sociologist, and futurist, and she's looking into the future on behalf of all of us. So thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.